Spiritual life is not an easy one. We're called to develop habits and virtues that may feel counterintuitive, to say the least. We also live in a world that constantly tests us and tempts us away from a holy life focused on God. So is there something God can do to help us in that journey? There are many things, but today we're going to focus on one, and that is the role of the sacraments in life. And if you want to know everything the Catholic Church understands about the sacramental life, we have our handy-dandy catechism to teach us. Welcome to episode 35 of All Roads Lead to Rome, the podcast for anyone who wants to know more about Catholicism. More than the journey of a lifetime, it is the journey of life itself. If you want to become a roadie here, visit our website, allroadsleadtorome.net, to get a full roadmap of our journey. You can sign up for our newsletter, connect with us on social media, reach out to me, and even become one of the patrons who makes all of this magic happen. I'm Dr. Bickford, and this is the second of 4 episodes on the Catechism. If you don't know what the Catechism is, then I suggest you go back and listen to episode 34 first. Now remember, part 1 was on the profession of faith and was organized around the Nicene Creed. In this episode, we're going to look at part 2 of the Catechism, and this focuses on the sacramental life. The sacramental life starts with liturgy. This makes sense because everything begins with the worship of God. The distinguished Boston College philosopher Peter Kreeft wrote this in his book, Catholic Christianity. Quote, "To many people, liturgy sounds like something soft, something vaguely sweet and sleepy. Liturgical terms like paschal mystery and sacramental signs sound somehow remote and removed from real life, like a fairy tale. Many dislike the subject of liturgy because it feels soft compared to creeds and commandments, the other 2 parts of the Catholic faith. Others get the exact same feeling of softness, but like it. They think it's more creative and like to celebrate community, that is, themselves. They dislike hard creeds and commandments, but like soft liturgy." All right, Kreeft is still going on here, and he continues, "Both are wrong. The liturgy is not a soft thing, like a human experience or feeling. It is hard. It is objectively real. It is not a humanly invented work of art, either ancient or modern. It is neither a delicate, ornate, out-of-date antique, nor a practical, up-to-date piece of contemporary relevance." He continues, "For it is not something at all, but someone, Jesus Christ, who becomes really present and active in the liturgy." End quote. All right, that was a lot. Quoting paragraph 1068 of the Catechism, quote, "It's the mystery of Christ that the Church proclaims and celebrates in her liturgy," end quote. All right, so that's long, but it's so important. For far too many, for most Protestants, as well as many Catholics, there's a sense that we go to a Mass for an experience. We go to feel something or experience something. In the big Protestant megachurches, they pull out all the stops with jumbotrons, theatrics, smoke machines, coffee shops, and props. I've heard some described as a half-hour concert followed by a TED Talk. Each one tries to outdo the others. But this is not why we go to the Mass. We don't go to get something. We go to do something. And when we do it, we are not the audience. God is. In episode 24, which was on prayer, I talked about the pop culture term called main character syndrome. Do you remember that? That refers to many people who think that they are the main character in every story or relationship they appear in. But in life, you and I are never the main character. God always is. We think the world should revolve around us, but it never does. It revolves around God. So if you go to worship God at the Mass and worry about how you feel about it, you're suffering from main character syndrome. On the other hand, if you and I are supporting characters, then the question is, how do we support God? Well, it's through a proper perspective on liturgy. God calls us to worship, and humans have always worshiped. But God doesn't need our worship. Worship is an expression of love and devotion to God. It is a statement of the state of our hearts. It is also a lesson for us on proper perspective in the relationship between us and God. I mean, think about that. In the military, officers don't need to be saluted by the enlisted, and they don't need to salute them back. But it is done by everyone as a reminder of how things are designed and how they function. Without that understanding, things go bad very quickly. And so in worship, when we don't have a proper understanding of how life is designed and functions, well, things go very bad very quickly for us. And we lose sight of who we are and who God is. And in that results in tremendous pain and suffering. And it's all pain and suffering we inflict on ourselves. And if things haven't gone far enough or bad enough, we experience that self-inflicted suffering and then try to blame God for it. Everything gets that messed up. So, when we worship, we keep a healthy understanding. Even more importantly, in paragraph 1104 of the Catechism, we're told that when we worship, we are not just remembering things that happened long ago in the life of Jesus, but instead, we encounter him alive as he is now. How does this happen? In Matthew 18, verse 20, Jesus said, quote, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them," end quote. In paragraph 1088 of the Catechism, we are reminded that Jesus is always present in his church, and this is especially true in the Mass. We say that the priest acts, quote, "in persona Christi," unquote, a Latin phrase, in persona Christi, meaning in the person of Christ, and Christ speaks through him and acts through him. And fortunately, this happens whether or not the priest is individually worthy of that role. Even more importantly, Jesus is present in the Eucharist. If you go back to episode 10 on transubstantiation, you'll get a very detailed argument of how we understand the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. But based on John 6 and the words of Jesus at the Last Supper, we believe that Jesus is really present in the elements. We're not remembering something, we're not commemorating something, and we're not memorializing something. We believe that at the consecration, we join every other Mass that has ever been said, is being said while we are at ours, or will be said in the future, are all together in the presence of Christ as he serves as high priest of heaven. It's a powerful and miraculous moment. And we are in the very presence of Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. Well, if you want to better understand how all that works, go back to episode 7 of this podcast, which was on the Mass. However, to be honest, one of my big unanswered questions about Catholics is that if we truly believe that we are in the presence of Christ, that it is Jesus at the altar, and that we come before him in the Mass, then why do so many of us dress like we do at the Mass? If I ever get an answer, I'll be sure to let you know. I think I had been a Catholic for over 2 years before I stopped wearing a jacket and tie to every Mass, including in the summer. So, everything I just shared is the focus of paragraphs 1066 through 1112 in the Catechism. If we understand our role in the liturgy, and we understand the way liturgy works, then it is a life-transforming experience. It is an encounter with holiness that develops holiness in us. Once we have a good understanding of liturgy, then we start to examine the sacraments. Paragraph 1113 says, quote, "The whole liturgical life of the Church revolves around the Eucharistic sacrifice and the sacraments," end quote. Paragraph 1324 states that the Eucharist is both the source and the summit of the Christian life. Our faith life begins with the Eucharist, and we reach the spiritual peak of our lives with the Eucharist. There's a lot to consider there. The liturgical life revolves around the sacraments, and the individual journey to Christian holiness must be steeped in the liturgy and the sacraments as well. Another important thing to understand is that the sacraments dispense grace. What is grace? It's a gift from God that we have not earned. Even more so, it's a gift that we are not even capable of earning. It's a gratuitous gift of God's love, healing, strength, and power that is given to us not because of who we are, but despite who we are. When we receive the sacraments, we're receiving gifts from God that strengthen us. Even with the sacrament of penance, we go to God broken and as failures, but we receive forgiveness and the freedom that comes with that. And the lessons that come with doing penance both strengthen us for the next round of in the struggle of life and for how we act with other people. If you remember anything from this episode, it is to remember the importance of the gift of grace that always accompanies the sacraments. In paragraph 1210, we read, quote, "The seven sacraments touch all the stages and all the important moments in Christian life. They give birth and increase, healing and mission to the Christian's life of faith. There's thus a certain resemblance between the stages of natural life and the stages of the spiritual life," end quote. And what that's saying is that it's explaining why there are seven sacraments. We can trace the origin of each sacrament to the life and work of Jesus, but they also ensure the transformative presence of God's grace at various stages through our lives. Baptism welcomes us into the family of faith. Confirmation, it's like ordination into the Christian life. It's when we truly begin the journey of holiness that will be the focus of the rest of our lives. Eucharist, while we take Christ into us so that we can be transformed into Him. And that's why so many truly saintly people try to find a way to attend Mass daily, not just weekly. The sacrament of reconciliation is to help us be forgiven for our failures along the way and to strengthen us for the struggles ahead. And then there are two vocational sacraments. One is marriage, the sacrament for people who will pursue the life of having a family and of cultivating holiness in their family and helping the next generation come along. The other vocational sacrament is the sacrament of holy orders, the sacrament for those called by God to serve the church and to serve the people of God as they go through their journeys. And then finally, sacrament of the sick. It's there to help us in times when we're facing our mortality and either the possibility or the likelihood of death. It allows us to face death with the full blessing of Christ's church. The design of all of this is beautiful and is clearly a design that comes from God. As smart as we are, we couldn't come up with this on our own. So do you see how it all works and shapes our lives? Just as we shape our days and our seasons with prayer and the liturgical seasons, we shape our lives in the context of the sacraments. But do you want to know something else? It runs even deeper than that. Paragraph 1119 says, quote, forming, as it were, one mystical person with Christ as the head, the Church acts in the sacraments as an organically structured priestly community. Through baptism and confirmation, the priestly people is enabled to celebrate the liturgy, while those of the faithful who have received holy orders are appointed to nourish the church with the word and grace of God in the name of Christ, end quote. Paragraph 1121 says, quote, the three sacraments of baptism, confirmation, and holy orders confer, in addition to grace, a sacramental character or seal by which the Christian shares in Christ's priesthood and is made a member of the church according to different states and functions. This configuration to Christ and to the church, brought about by the Spirit, is indelible. It remains forever in the Christian as a positive disposition for grace, a promise and a guarantee of divine protection, and as a vocation of divine worship in the service of the church. Therefore, these sacraments can never be repeated, end quote. It's so significant. And it's something that requires a lot of reflection. When you are baptized and confirmed, God imparts grace to you that stays with you your whole life, no matter what. You can sin, you can turn back on your faith, but the indelible mark is still there. And with that mark, you can draw on the strength of God to help you, to sustain you and to strengthen you. And when you look at the extraordinary lives of the saints and martyrs, they're not superhumans. They are people who maximized their reliance on and use of the graces that God gives to them. The first step is to realize that these sacraments are not just boxes to be checked. They are as important to you as ordination is to a priest. Seeing that is a very big step in the growth of your formation. Paragraph 1130 quotes Thomas Aquinas, where he wrote, quote, therefore, a sacrament is a sign that commemorates what precedes it, which is Christ's passion. It demonstrates what is accomplished in us through Christ's passion, which is grace, and prefigures what the passion pledges to us, which is future glory, end quote. Now, this section of the Catechism goes through each sacrament in detail. I dealt with the sacraments in episodes 8, 9, and 10 of the podcast, so I don't want to repeat all of that here. That would add a couple of episodes to this series on the Catechism. However, if you want to know where to find the specific information, here is where you find most of it. Get your finger paint, crayon, pencil, or whatever out. Here we go. There's a lot of information on the Church's understanding of liturgy, music, and the liturgical seasons in paragraphs 1135 to 1209. Baptism is covered in paragraphs 1213 to 1284. Confirmation is covered in paragraphs 1285 to 1321. The Holy Eucharist is covered in paragraphs 1322 to 1419. That one's longer. There's a lot of specificity there. Reconciliation is covered in paragraphs 1420 to 1498. Sacrament of the Sick is covered in paragraphs 1499 to 1532. And then Holy Orders is covered in paragraphs 1536 to 1600. So if you want to know why there's a difference between a deacon, a priest, and a bishop, well, then you look up the section on Holy Orders. And then finally, matrimony, don't forget that, is covered in paragraphs 1601 to 1666. And this might sound like it's thousands of pages to read, with no pictures. Well, the good news is that in my copy of the Catechism, all of the sacraments are covered in 103 pages. That's not too bad. The bad news is there are no pictures. But it's okay. It's manageable. Okay, so I haven't used this term yet, but it's one you will hear when people start getting into deep discussions about the sacraments. It's a Latin phrase called ex opere operato. We love our Latin phrases, don't we? Ex opere operato. It literally means from the work done or by the work done. And it has a couple of meanings. One is that there is an objective efficacy of the sacrament. All right, well, what does that mean? It means that the sacraments actually do confer the grace that they signify. Real grace is dispensed. This is not some memorial, as I said, about grace. It's not some remembrance of grace. It is real grace given. So imagine going to a reenactment of a historical battle. Everyone is dressed up in authentic clothing from that period of time, and they've got authentic weapons from that period in time, and they move about the battlefield like the original armies did, and so on. That would be a memorial of what happened long ago. We do the reenactment to remember something that happened long ago. Now, imagine if the reenactors really started fighting each other and the battle flowed exactly as the original did. We would be in shock. It would no longer be a reenactment, but it would now be the real thing. Well, you know what? The sacraments are just as shocking because sacraments are the real thing. We're not remembering the Last Supper. We are at the Last Supper with Christ, and the Eucharist becomes his body and his blood just as he said it does. It's shocking. And he can't be underestimated. There's another facet to ex opere operato, and that is it is not the priest who confers the grace. God does. The priest performs the rite, but only God dispenses the grace. So the question has arisen in time, well, what happens if the priest has not been a good or holy man and becomes unworthy of the office, but no one or maybe only a few people know? Does this nullify the conferring of the sacrament? The answer is a resounding no. The sacrament is still real. This is important because otherwise people would often be questioning whether or not they are really receiving the sacraments. So the priest performs the rite, and regardless of their spiritual state, it is God who dispenses the grace. Which is a relief, but there's a catch. And the catch is not on the part of the priest, it's on the part of you and me. If you receive the sacraments and you're in a state of sin or participate in the sacraments but don't believe in them, you're going to look good to others or keep a relative off your back and so on. In that case, you do not receive the full benefit of the sacrament. In other words, the sacraments are better than a bad priest, but not better than a bad you. That's something to think about. Well, let me up the ante even more a bit here. In Matthew 10, verses 38 to 39, we read, "Whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it." End quote. This means that we're to lose ourselves in God. It means that we are to come to recognize that God is the main character, not ourselves, and that our focus is on God. I mean, isn't that wonderful? But by losing ourselves in God while on earth, what we're doing is we're practicing being in heaven, where we will have eternal joy because we will be focused on God there and not ourselves. And when we get to heaven, we will know what to do because we've been practicing it. That is in contrast to people who get stuck in purgatory and have to struggle to learn that it really is God who's the focus. And contrast all of this with the world we live in now, where people more and more just focus on themselves. 20 years ago, if you visited the Mona Lisa at the Louvre in Paris, you would see a crowd of people standing around the painting and contemplating it. If you go today, You'll see people with their cell phones taking selfies in front of the painting so they can share it on social media with their friends. Not long ago, if you were in conversation with someone, you knew that it was important to strike a balance and keep the conversation flowing back on and forth about both of you. Whereas today, so many people just focus on themselves. Recently, I had a lunch with a colleague who spent a solid hour in a monologue about everything going on in that person's life. And they showed no interest at all in anything about my life. On another day, I was in a meeting where someone shared that one of their children had just had a severely premature baby the day before. And someone else in the meeting responded with a long story about a premature baby of a relative who has grown up and is now 10 years old. And this person wanted all the adventures this 10-year-old has been having. The person going through the fear and trauma couldn't get another word in edgewise. It seems like as a culture, we no longer know how to listen. We just want to talk. I'm guilty of it. You're guilty of it. There's something in our culture. We're all so desperately alone. We just want to be heard. And we forget others when we try to be heard. And this makes it hard for us to lose ourselves. But we need to. God is the main character. We see this in the liturgy, in the sacraments, and in the lives of the saints who we're hoping to imitate and become like. I quoted Peter Kreefton's book, Catholic Christianity, at the beginning of this episode. I want to quote it again. This is from page 321. Quote, "The universe is a giant cathedral. We can understand the point and purpose of the universe by looking at a cathedral. Every detail in the great medieval cathedrals was for the Eucharist. They were built primarily for the Eucharist, to house the Eucharist. Similarly, the whole church on earth is the house of bread," the meaning of the Hebrew word for Bethlehem, the town where Jesus was born, that Christ established for the Eucharist. This is his love's ultimate aim, for love's aim is union, and the Eucharist is the most intimate union between us and Christ that exists in the world. God created the universe for this love union. He made the universe to house the church, and he made the church to house the Eucharist. So it is true to say that the ultimate reason in this life for the creation of the universe is the Eucharist. End quote. That is mind-blowing and perspective-changing in the best possible way. So what will be on the test? In part 1 of the Catechism, we focus on the profession of faith, what Christians should believe. It's organized around the Nicene Creed, and that was the focus of episode 34. Part 2 of the Catechism focuses on the celebration of the Christian mystery, and that focuses on the liturgy and the sacraments. To live a sacramental life is an important part of becoming holy. And today, I hope I showed you what that looks like. We still have 2 parts to go. Part 3 is life in Christ, and part 4 is on prayer. But together, the Catechism shows you what Catholics believe, how Catholics live, and where Catholics see it all going. And no matter where you have been on your spiritual journey, it has all been preparation, just as it was for me, to put you on the road to Christ's church. And that is why all roads lead to Rome.